Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining. We are so excited. We have so many experts on all things BDD here today, and you're going to be hearing some really great things that you can take away to your teams as well as your organization share. And so just wanted to start off with actually some housekeeping items. So just so everyone knows, this presentation is being recorded and you will be sent that recording after the presentation. I would say give it 24 to 48 hours, but you will receive it and you are more than welcome to share that with anyone and everyone on your team. Also, we are going to be answering questions throughout the presentation. So please feel free, we're going to be monitoring the Q&A box, not the chat box, the Q&A box. So if you can type your questions in there, we will do our best to actually answer the questions live. Or if we get too many, we'll just start chatting away the answers to you and typing them in that chat box. Finally, we will have a Q&A portion of the webinar that we have scheduled. So don't worry if we don't get to your question right away. There will be time at the end that we will get to it, and still we will have folks who will follow up with you if you do have any questions. So we're really excited today to be joined by two of the smartest people I know when it comes to behavior-driven development. We have the expert on with us, Gaspar, who is joining us from actually Budapest. So we're really excited to have him. It's a very global webinar. And then I'm Bria from SmartBear, and we also have Param, who is one of our lead engineers here, who can talk about all things BDD as well. So with that, I'm going to let you both do a quick introduction of yourself and go ahead and get started. Gaspar, would you like to start?
No, actually, Param will start.
Okay, Param, you can start.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Param Chopra. I'm one of the engineers here at the U.S. office at SmartBear. And today I'll briefly talk about just who SmartBear is, what we can bring to the table before handing over the reins to Gaspar. So SmartBear Software, we're a global software company founded in 2009. We're headquartered a little outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And at least in my time here, we've almost doubled in size. We are about 6.5 million users, over 20,000 customers in pretty much every country out there. And we're now exceeding almost 530, 525 plus employees. We definitely got our big start in some open source tools, SOAP UI and Swagger. We also own the pro versions of those solutions, along with some of the other solutions you see here in front of me. And as a company, our goal is to get our clients to build better software with less bugs, faster to market, right? So we have products that fit any gaps you feel you have in your SDLC, maybe in a design phase, with a tool like perhaps HipTest or Swagger Hub. Perhaps we have our, I think our main tools, of course, are testing suite of tools, Test Complete, SOAP UI Pro, Load Ninja, cross-browser testing. We can also go ahead and maybe monitor applications with Alert Site as well. This is only a sampling of our product offerings. We definitely have some other tools as well. I would recommend checking out the website. All right. I think I'm good to go on that. If you have any other questions about what SmartBear can do for you, please don't hesitate to reach out via the website or by email directly as well. All right, Gaspar, the reins are all yours.
Okay. Good. So thank you very much. My name is Gaspar Nagy, and as Bria introduced me, I'm joining from Budapest. Actually, I have a development background, but nowadays I work as a BDD coach, trainer. I sometimes call myself a BDD addict. I'm really keen on this topic. And since I feel like a BDD addict, what I'm also doing, I'm trying to seek for interesting articles, blog posts, whatsoever, which are related to BDD, test automation, or agile testing. And as I'm collecting these articles, I thought at some point that why not sharing it with others? So I started a newsletter called BDD Addict. You can find it at the bddaddict.com. It's a it's a monthly newsletter where you will see some interesting articles that I have found. And of course, I'm also here, any feedback from others. So if you find a good article, send it to me, then I most likely will be including it into the next issue. So this is about myself, but actually my professional entity or my business entity is a small company called Spec Solutions. This is where I do my consulting and training engagements. At Spec Solutions, basically, we are dealing with three main topics. The most important topic, the training and coaching things that I already mentioned in the topic of BDD, Specflow, Cucumber, test-driven development, agile testing. These are our main topics. I'm also the creator of the BDD open source tool for .NET, which is called Specflow, and obviously I'm still quite connected to this open source project. So I'm trying to help the open source community, writing sometimes some customizations, extensions. Right now or today, I'm working with on a new Visual Studio editor called DevRoom. This is what I'm also doing there. Besides that, I also have a small tool called Spexing, which is doing some integration of Specflow with Azure DevOps. You can also find my upcoming courses. If you go to my website, basically you can find much more information about that. So basically, this is about me and my company. So I think we are good to go to jump into the meat and start with the presentation, right? Yeah, I guess so. So okay, so basically the topic for today, or the primary topic for today, was writing better BDD scenarios, and this is what I would like to summarize now. Basically, there will be a 30 minutes presentation, or half an hour presentation, and afterwards, Param will show some of the aspects of that in live with HipTest. So this is how we agreed to present the content for today. In my presentation in this half an hour, basically, I would like to address three topics. The first is that a very, very short introduction to behavior-driven development. I guess many of you who are joining have heard about BDD, maybe just a very, very quick recap. And then the main content will be basically to think about what makes a scenario good. And actually, we are going to do this through identifying and fixing some common problems that I see everywhere, where I'm trying to help doing better BDD process. And of course, at the end, we are wrapping up things and we'll list some 6 core principles that you will hopefully also find useful. Okay, so let's jump into the first part. So as I said, I would like to give a very, very short introduction. I plan to do it in 3 minutes. So what is BDD? What is behavior-driven development? And if you search for behavior-driven development and trying to find some definition for that, there are quite many. I was trying to find something which is simple enough and probably focusing on really the key values of behavior-driven development. And basically, this is it. So behavior-driven development, at least for me, is about understanding, documenting, and verifying business requirements through illustrative examples. So these are probably the most important things. We would like to understand the requirements. We want to have a better collaboration on discussing and discovering the requirements. We would like to document them. We would like to document them in a form of BDD scenarios, as you will see. And obviously, we will also use these BDD scenarios to verify our application. BDD is primarily focusing on the business requirements. There are other requirements as well, but these are not typically the primary focus of BDD. And all through this process, illustrative examples will help us. We will not talk too much about the examples today, but if you check out the previous webinar, then you will hear a little bit more about that. So just to put this definition into a more visual representation, basically this is a representation how you can imagine that. So on one side, we have the requirements, not necessarily written down requirements, but expectations from the business side. And on the far end, we will have the application that we will need to implement, and we would like to have a good software to be implemented. And one is sitting in the problem domain, the other is sitting in the solution domain, and we would like to connect these two. And actually, the BDD scenarios, these give and then based specification elements, are somehow making the connection between these two. So they are sitting in the middle. They are part of the shared ownership. They are still understandable by the business, but still provide enough detail and then they are concrete enough so that we can use them during the development process. And as it sits in the middle, on one hand, it validates, it makes understandable the requirements, and on the other hand, it can be used to verify the application running it as a test and seeing it passing or failing, which is a very, very, very good feedback about the application's functional quality. So if you see this, this picture, this visualization of the process, basically this visualization is also helping us to see what kind of typical activities, what kind of typical tasks you need to do or you need to integrate into your development process once you practice BDD. The first one, which we call discovery, this is basically how we can better discuss the requirements and how we can collect examples during these discussions. Those will be a very good starting point, very good foundation for writing scenarios. Once we did the discovery and once we have the examples, basically the next step is formulation. When we take these examples and document them as BDD scenarios, writing them down, checking them into the source code, and they become a sort of living documentation because they will be there for until the lifetime of your project. However, you can always run them and they turn either red or green. So they are indicating whether the application is fulfilling that. So we are documenting these examples. This is the formulation task or formulation activity. And obviously also the automation is very, very important when we take these scenarios and automating the system through this scenario. So basically these are these 3 BDD activities that you will need to focus on. And today we will focus on the formulation part. So how to write good BDD scenarios, how to document the examples as good BDD scenarios. I was mentioning a couple of times the examples. As I said, I don't want to go too much into that, but just to give you an impression, what do I mean when I say example? So basically what you see on the screen is a simple post-it note or an index card where with a handwritten bullet points, somebody has collected basically a step-by-step story or step-by-step description how the application is going to be used once it will be implemented. This is a very good mental preparation for the development. We can imagine upfront how the application will work, and we can just write down how the users will interact with the system, how the system will behave. So in this case, if this is a trivia site, then maybe one example of the many will be that, okay, you are registering a team, getting an easy question. If you are answering it correctly, then you get 10 points. This is showing some aspect of the scoring system of this application. So this is an example. This is what we collect through the discovery phase, but the formulation phase that we are focusing today, when we are turning these examples into BDD scenarios that you have probably already seen. These are using the give and when and then keywords usually. And as you can see right now, I have rephrased my example into a BDD scenario. The content is the same. So it says correct easy answer scores 10. Even I register a team. When I submit a correct easy answer, then my score should be 10. So it's basically the same thing that I was writing it down, but now it's properly phrased. Now I can check this in. Now this is part of my documentation. And this is very, very important because people who see BDD for the first time, they just see these scenarios as tests, but they are more than tests. So they are also illustrating the requirements. They are also documenting the behavior. And obviously, they are also automated tests. You can find more information about this discovery phase with our book that we did with Seb Rose. You will find the link in the slide deck. Good, but right now let's focus on good BDD scenarios. So how good BDD scenario looks like, and in general, what makes a good BDD scenario, what makes a scenario good. With Seb Rose right now, we are working on a second book, which is exactly focusing on this part. And as part of preparing for that book, we have basically collected 6 different principles that are pretty important for good BDD scenarios. We will go into these 6 principles, but right now I would like to turn the question around a little bit. And instead of seeing what makes a scenario good, let's see what can make a scenario bad. If you check out the internet, so unfortunately, not every scenario that you find there are really good. And whenever I'm visiting some customers, they are sometimes having some really bad scenarios. And just to give you an example for that, I was trying to make up a really bad example, a really bad scenario for myself. This is how it looks. I had to simplify it a little bit because it was too long. Right now, this is 27 lines. but I have already seen a scenario which was more than 100 lines. So just imagine that just this scenario times 4 or something like that, that could be a really good example of a bad scenario. So if you look at this scenario and you try to read it one by one, I will not read it through fully, but then somewhat, I think we can understand the individual things. So I could say that given I navigate to some URL, when I wait until the link becomes visible, browser title is that, I click on a link, I wait some milliseconds, I click on a link, ask a question. So actually we can understand what happens in the individual bits. And actually, you can even probably run this scenario and it just passes or fails. But there is still a big problem with this scenario. So if you see that this scenario really behaves like a test, so it sometimes turns green, sometimes turns red, but unfortunately, we have absolutely no idea what this is for. What does it want to say? So we are understanding the individual bits of that, but we don't understand it's in whole. So what do we want it to say with that? What do we want it to test with that? By the way, just for your curiosity, actually this scenario is about a hacked version of the Stack Overflow website called Spec Overflow, working a little bit like that. You can ask a question, select some category, select some text. So basically this is what you have seen in this very long scenario. So basically the problem with this scenario is that somehow it is focusing on not on the high level goal of the scenario, but on the individual mechanics of what do I need to do? How do I need to automate this to turn into a test? And actually when we do BDD, what we would like to do, we would like to document the requirements to get feedback from the business. So this is our primary goal. We want to enable some collaboration. We would like to enable some communication between the business side and the solution side. However, they will not be able to give feedback if the scenarios are focusing on so much on these mechanics, the technical solution details like this scenario did. Even though that they are understanding what is a click and feel, so they can understand the individual lines, but they cannot understand the entire scenario as a whole. So they are probably not be able to give you feedback or not be able to give you feedback at the right level. This is a trap. This is something that I would like to highlight very much, that it's so easy to fall into this trap because it's so easy to come up with such a scenario. You just need to automate a couple of steps, how to click a link, how to enter something into a text box, and how to navigate to a URL. And you will have it seems like that you have a working test. However, these kind of solutions are absolutely not scaling. So right now it works, but if you have 10 of them or hundreds of them, then it will be a maintenance nightmare. Actually, it will be at the end like a parasite, which is eating up your efforts and energy, but they don't really provide any value. So be careful about that and not go into this, try to not go into this trap. If you have gone into this trap, then we need to fix the things. And unfortunately, fixing such scenarios is not that easy. It's a painful, hard job because you have to reverse engineer what the actual scenario wanted to do and turn it back into the just try to find the meaning of that. So obviously it's better to avoid that right from the beginning. But I mean, if you already have such a bad scenario, we have no better idea than try to fix it. And this is what I would like to do. So trying to fix this mechanics focused scenario. When I do the fix, actually I will use these principles that I have already highlighted. We are calling them with Sabros, we are calling them brief principles. Basically, we are calling them brief principles because if you read the first 5 principles, the initial letters of the first 5 principles, then the brief is coming out, which is also an important principle. So that's actually the 6th one. So what are these 5 principles? So business language, real data, intention revealing, essential, and focused. And basically what I'm going to do now, I will one by one, I will try to apply these principles, not exactly in this order. And I try to use these principles to fix my big ugly scenario. And you will see how you can use these principles in practice. Okay, so this is what I will do. And so let's get started. Let's start with the first one. We will start with the letter B, so the business language. What we are trying to do now is that we will try to find a business language that is expressing our intentions. So let's go back to the ugly scenario. I was even zooming in a little bit so you don't see the entire scenario. This will be more than enough for us to play with. So basically, this is a very hard thing, because what you need to do, you need to go step by step and try to understand what we actually wanted to do with this step or with a couple of steps together. So let's try to do and for that, sometimes you maybe even need to talk to the business. Sometimes you maybe will need to talk to your colleagues. So this is not something which is very simple. Of course, in my demonstration, I have already prepared. So here it will be simpler. So let's go. Let's make a few steps of that just to you see the rhythm of that. So first thing that I have identified that these first two lines, so give and I navigate to some URL and I wait until this home link becomes visible. Basically, what I wanted to say with that is that that I'm checking the home page. This is actually what I really wanted to say. I'm just checking the home page. This is the technical implementation, how I do check the home page. So I can go next. So the next steps is that then the browser title is Stack Overflow home. Well, actually, the good question, why was it important for someone that this is exactly the title? But probably, yeah, I don't know. So maybe what we wanted to say is that generally, not necessarily the browser title, but the homepage title is Stack Overflow home. Probably this is what we wanted to highlight with that. Then we can move forward. We can go forward to the next steps. Right now, I have removed some steps for making it shorter. These are the steps which are related to login. So you are clicking on the login page, the login link. You're entering your username, password. Click on login button and probably wait. So that was probably the original set of steps. Actually, what we want to do with these couple of steps, we just want to make sure that we are logged in. So even I'm logged in, probably this is what I wanted to say with these steps. Just pushing it a little bit up so that I have more space down. So actually the next big step, big range of steps. So clicking a link, ask a question, waiting, clearing the text box, entering something into that text box, entering something else into some other text box, and finally clicking a button. So all what we wanted to do with this couple of steps is probably registering a question or asking a new question. So this is how I simplify that. When I ask a new question with, and these are the details that you see here. What is the title? What is the body? What are the text that the user have entered, and so on. So I will not go further with that. This is a very painful and hard job, but you need to go really step by step and trying to figure out what the individual steps are wanted, what we actually wanted to do with those steps. And at the end, what we get to is a little bit smaller scenario, which is more expressed with the business language, not so much on the solution language. It's not anymore the browser terms, but actually it's showing what we actually wanted to do with these things. Okay, but it's still long and it's still not perfect, but actually we have made our first step to turn it into a business language. So let's go to the second step. So let's go to actually the letter F. So let's try to make the scenarios focused by illustrating a single rule. And whenever I say a rule, what I really mean is that, that right now, if you look at this scenario, it's very hard to see what was our purpose altogether with this scenario. Even if you read the title, question test, it doesn't really say anything. And it's a pretty long scenario. And if you also look at the then steps, typically the then steps are the ones which are identifying the verification elements of a scenario. So if you look at the then step, actually what you can see that there are a couple of them, and they are even all across the entire scenario in different places. Probably if we have these different then steps and they are not even next to each other, probably actually we wanted to check multiple business rules, multiple acceptance criteria, so to say. But just now everything is chained up into a single scenario. So probably you have seen such scenario, and it's a little bit similar to what we are usually doing with manual testing. But because when we are doing manual testing, the most important resources is the human resource. So we have to go through them, and therefore it makes sense to chain up all the different features into a longer user journey, because this is how we can better use our efforts. However, For automated scenarios, the things are a little bit different because in such a multi-rule, multi-purpose scenario are typically causing quite much bottleneck in the development process. It will introduce some sort of dependency between the different features. Nobody will be really feeling responsible for that scenario. It will be very rare, very frequently breaking and being brittle. Sometimes or random failures will be quite common with these scenarios. And it will also stop you doing test first. So you will not be able to implement this scenario fully before the implementation of the application because you would need to fulfill a lot of features to be able to implement that. So generally we can say that small and focused scenarios are much better. Even though that maybe with this scenario, we were winning a little bit of execution time, but we have lost a lot on the process side, on the maintainability side. So definitely we should work on that. So if you want to identify what were the business rules behind these different dance steps, again, this is a hard thing. You have to probably discuss with the product owner. You have to probably discuss it with the colleagues. And altogether, the question that you would need to ask is the why. So why was it important for me to do this then step? Why was it important for me to verify this or that thing? Let's do a couple of, let's try to fix a couple of them. Let's see the first one. So the title should be Stack Overflow Home. So let's say that I have discussed it with my business, and at the end, it turned out that what we actually wanted to check is that whether the application homepage is well identifiable. So whenever our users are seeing it, they immediately know where they are and what do they see. So now what I did, basically, I have split it up. Or split up these two steps into a separate scenario. The application homepage is identifiable, and basically it just contains these two steps. So I can go forward. Let's check the other two then steps. So actually it's related to the result of asking the question. So the homepage is activated and the question should be appearing at the end. So basically what it turned out that what we wanted to check here is that new questions should be added to the question list. This is actually what we wanted to verify. So now we have another scenario which is describing that new questions should be added to the question list. And of course we can move on. Maybe the next one is related to the question details. Actually what we identified that here the business rule that we wanted to verify is that the details of the question can be accessed from the question list. This was the important thing for us. So now basically instead of having one bigger scenario with multiple dance steps, now we have a few smaller scenarios with only one dance step in each, or only a few dance steps in each, and basically this is how we could get into the focusedness. So now these scenarios are much more focused. Actually, these scenarios are getting better and better. Of course, there are some duplications still, so we still have to do some further steps. So let's go to the step number 3, which is the letter I, so intention revealing. So let's reveal the intention rather than describing the mechanics. I mean, these scenarios are not that bad anymore. However, actually in 2 places, you can still see some traces of expressing the mechanics. So for example, if you look at the scenario in the bottom, what it says that given I have logged in and I have added a question with some title, body and text. And actually this is describing how I can achieve my precondition. But actually if you want to focus on the intention, that what we would need to do, we would need to move away from this how do I achieve it, which is the mechanics, to the what do I expect, which is the intention. So if you think about that, and if you try to see what these 2 steps, so given I'm logged in and I have added the question with some details, then basically what you can say that the intention of these 2 steps was that somehow we would need to ensure that there is a precondition, that there is a question added with that kind of detail. We don't care how they did that. We don't care how many steps you needed to do so. We are only interested into the result, or is interested in the result. And this is very, very important, and very, very important also for the automation, because if you are stating your intention, stating the result, then basically it opens up a lot of space, a lot of options in automation. this given step in the bottom scenario could be automated in a way that you are logging in and asking a question through the website. That's one possibility. But now, if we feel that this is too slow or too brittle, then we could maybe just simply add a record to the database. And this is also a way how we can ensure this precondition. So basically, with that, we are not only making the scenario simpler and more understandable, but we can also make the automation bits much more optimal, and you can do further enhancements there. Okay, so this is how you can imagine this intention revealing. The given I have logged in, that's not so much of a problem now. I did just a small rephrasing that that instead of saying that I have logged in, which is saying what I had to do, I just saying given I'm logged in, I don't care how I did that. I'm just interested in the result. There is an alternative that's not so interesting. So basically with that, if I was just rephrasing these scenarios by focusing on the intentions, then now I had again even smaller and even better automatable scenarios from my original list. So let's go for the number 4 step, which is nothing else than the letter E, essential or essential. Keep the essential details only. This is what we would like to see here. Fortunately, in this scenario, there are not so many details. However, still, you can see that it also states what the body and the text of the different, of the individual the questions should be. However, these details are not really interesting for us in this particular scenario. We don't want to make an assertion for it. We don't want to make any verification on that. Actually, they are just, of course, we have to submit some body and some text, because otherwise maybe the form cannot be submitted, but we don't care about the details really. However, now as they are stated here in the scenario itself, this might cause some sort of maintenance problems, because maybe later on we are just enabling some minimum lengths for the body. And let's say that at least it has to be 20 characters. Then now many of our scenarios suddenly start to break because they were using some sample data for the body, which is much shorter, even though that this scenario had nothing to do with the body. So what you will see, and in this case, it's not that visible, but in some other cases, if you are showing some details, they can be a little bit confusing, because people don't understand, why did you need this body? Why was it important to have these tags here? So generally what we can say is that more details are not necessarily causing more clarity. So generally unnecessary, unimportant, irrelevant, incidental details typically causing confusion. And as I said, they are also pretty bad for maintainability. So we would like to get rid of them. We would like to clean up our scenario from that. In my case, this was pretty simple. I just got rid of the body and the text from this data table there for the van step. But of course, if you do the automation, you cannot just remove these details, because for the automation, we need these details. We need to enter somebody, we need to enter some text. So what we are actually doing is pushing it down to the automation layer. In the automation layers, we have much better options to manage that. We can put it into a constant value. We can share it across multiple steps. So managing the default data, default details there is much easier. So this is what we could do. And actually, since after that, only the title remains, I could even just get rid of the data table and just say that when I ask a new question with test question 1, 2, 3, 4, then this and this should happen. This is how we simplified this scenario. Good. So this is our simplified version of this middle scenario. Got rid of the incidental data from there. And this is basically bringing us to the step 5, use real data. And this is the R letter from our brief principles. In this case, basically the data that we could play with a little bit, or what we could think about is the title of the question, test question 1, 2, 3, 4. From a testing point of view, this data is perfect. I mean, any letters, if you could be even writing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or lorem ipsum, or whatever else you could write there. From the testing perspective, it doesn't really matter. However, what we said that with these scenarios, we would like to enable collaboration. We would like to get feedback. So sometimes you can get much better feedback if you are using some data which is a little bit closer to the data that the users are providing. If I just see a question like a title like test question 1, 2, 3, 4, probably this doesn't really tells me a story that okay, how the users were using my system. It doesn't pops me the question whether case sensitiveness is important. It doesn't brings me into any interesting discussions. On the other hand, if you would just replace that with a more realistic data, in this case for me it's very easy. So I'm just changing the test question 1, 2, 3, 4 to a real question like how to write better VDD scenarios. Then maybe that's helping us a little bit to imagine how this system will be used. Okay, these are really typically questions. What kind of question words do we use? Shall it be unique or whatever? So there are probably a lot of interesting questions that you can come up with if you see real data. So sometimes concrete piece of real data can really better illustrate what we want to explain. Of course, this is a kind of a matter of style, and you can play with it, whether you are phrasing something a little bit more abstract or more concrete. Even this scenario could be expressed in a more abstract way, just saying that when I ask a question, then the question should appear in the question list. But generally, I like to put a little bit of concrete real data in there. It's typically better expressing the problem, better expressing our intention with that particular scenario. And actually, this brings us to the last one. So keep the scenarios brief. And actually, our scenarios with all these changes, all these simplifications that we have done so far, we've got to some very good size. So generally, what we say is that if the scenarios are short, it will be much easier to get feedback from the business. It will be much easier to maintain them, and it will be altogether much easier to work with these scenarios. So keeping them brief is also a very important principle. So basically, these were the 6 steps that we went through, and at the end, we have quite nice and brief scenarios. Maybe you can still make them better, but I think they are good enough. So maybe it's time to celebrate. So so let's do the celebration, which is for me the summary of what we have done so far. So actually we have started from this very ugly scenario. Now we have much better and much more useful scenarios, and this is what you can what you have seen through these individual steps. And whenever we were doing that, basically we were using these 6 principles. Business language, so that we want to express the things using a language that everyone understands, not the solution language. We said that we would like to use real data. It's much better telling a story. We said that we would like to have the scenarios intentional revealing. We rather want to focus on what we want it to do and not how, and the mechanics, how we do that. We want to only keep the essential data in there and leave out anything which is unimportant. We want to keep our scenarios focused, hopefully only illustrating a single rule, a single acceptance criteria. And at the end, we would like to keep our scenarios also brief, short, 5 lines, maybe. That's a good size. As I said, we are working on these principles in our new book. If you would like to read more about that, you feel free to check it out at bddbooks.com. We already have a beta version of the beta ebook version of the formulation books with the first few chapters. Go there, you can check that out, and we are really happy to get any feedback from that. And with that, basically, this is how I wanted to finish my my presentation part. I wish you happy formulation. I hope that you got a few good ideas. This was me. You see my upcoming courses. And with that, I'm handing it over to Param, who will do a demo of HipTest. And after the demo, we will have a Q&A section. So if you have some questions, keep collecting them. We will try to answer them together with Param at the very end.
All right, so now what we'll go ahead and do is take a look at HipTest. So very briefly, everything that Gaspar has talked about could certainly be achieved in open source, but definitely it will take a lot of effort to do so. And a lot of open source tools might not get us to the idealized workflow that is behind behavior-driven development and writing out scenarios in this way. So what we'll show you today is a tool that allows you to write these different scenarios, but also allow you to follow that design, test, and learn workflow, BDD, a lot more efficiently than, let's say, an open source software. Only about 10 minutes or so, so it's by no means a full demo, but I'll try to hit on the high-level points today. So, Gaspar, I believe you're going to have to stop sharing your screen, and then I'll go.
Okay, sorry, yeah. Do that.
No problem. And everyone should be able to see my screen and mouse moving around. Do let us know if you cannot. So, what are you looking at here? We're looking at a specific project in Specflow. As you can see here, I just named our project in the description after our webinar today. Quick look and feel of the UI. We can see a summary of the items in our project. In HipTest, we call our Gherkin scenarios. And we call the steps that make up those scenarios, our given when then steps, action words. And an action word is simply a reusable step in HipTest, but I'll cover more of that in brief in just a second. You can see maybe a quick test run overview of maybe one of my recent test runs. You can see when it was last edited. You can also see things like backing up, coding, or deleting our project. You can see other related test management materials like some last events, who has access to my project, maybe importing or adding new tests or existing test cases, et cetera, et cetera. What I will say is if any of you are interested in looking at this tool, definitely check out both our roadmap on Trello. You can exactly see what HipTest is trying to do in the future and currently, along with our user community and documentation. Because you have a lot of users who are also trying to pursue BDD like yourselves, and whether they are getting started, they're in the middle of their process, or just simply refining, there's a lot of good content out there in our community. Now, I briefly covered the UI. What does HipTest do well in this BDD lifecycle? Well, it's going to support not only collaboration, but that design, test, and learn kind of workflow. And what I'll do is I'll quickly show this in a model of some of the scenarios that Gaspar has talked about today. So, the whole strain is, how can we use HipTest to write better BDD scenarios? Well, at first glance, you want to be able to collaborate to write these scenarios effectively, right? It should take a team of people to kind of do what Gaspar did and say, okay, we're going to simplify this logic, remove this unnecessary detail here. Because, if only one person is doing it, they might not be able to see all sides to the argument, right? So at first glance, you want to be able to collaborate as a team. And I think we can do so very easily in HipTest, given the simple UI. We have relatively straightforward ways of organizing our data, whether using our open-ended folder structure or our tagging system. We definitely recommend you organize your scenarios by functional area or behavior in HipTest, so it's easier for you to see exactly how your application is behaving at any point in time. You also do things like integrate with Jira, Slack, or Trello, or Jenkins, or really any web-based tool with a badge or linker. This allows us to tie our information out to other tools in the market. And so specifically with Jira, which I think is one of our bigger integrations, considering Atlassian is a big firm in space, we can basically take our test data from HipTest and throw it directly against a Jira record. We can even do things like, for example, create Jira items directly from a HipTest screen and see the kind of data flow back and forth between these tags, right? So whether you want to collaborate within the tool or want to expand your workflow to other tools, right? HipTest allows us to all work together as a team, no matter our technical role, right? The UI here is relatively straightforward. So whether I'm technical or not, I can kind of work through, understand what the tool is doing and how we're testing our application. So you're able to collaborate, you have to be able to collaborate effectively. But now in the design, test, and learn workflow, I think the main meat of the tool is definitely our scenario editor. So you take a look at some of the scenarios that Gaspar has walked through here in his demo, right? We see our scenario here, application homepage is identifiable, and we can see our main scenario here. When I check the homepage, then the title should be Spec Overflow-Home. Now what's cool in HipTest says there's some great questions in the Q&A about, hey, can we parameterize this? Are we able to kind of substitute the extra data? We definitely can. We want you to use Gherkin tables in HipTest. And while this specific test case here is of a hard-coded value, right? The step itself, I can go in and control what the default value of that step is, right? So very much like programming, it's up to you to choose the scope of where this data is going to live. If the data is going to be consistent for all your scenarios, maybe the value of this data, this parameter, lives at the step level. But perhaps you're checking multiple different home pages, right? And maybe you want to make this empty and data driven. And that's exactly what we do in some other scenarios in HipTest. So, for example, the adding questions scenario that he had written out, new questions should be added to the questions list. We can see that that @login tag that he was using in the scenarios ends up showing up something like this. I can basically throw in any step in my setup section in a folder of scenarios, and that setup step will apply to all scenarios in it, very much like that @login tag or a background if you have written Gherkin before. And then as you can see here, I'm data driving this scenario with some of the data that Gaspar had shown us in his scenarios, right? I have my data set. Perhaps the Gherkin table is a little easier to look at, right? How to write better BDD scenarios, 0, 0, right? Those are my 3 variables up here. And then with a little syntax, I can go ahead and include that directly in my steps, right? So when I go ahead and see my test case for this, I can see how the data fills into the variables. Now this is all fine and dandy, right? You're saying, great, I could do this in open source, but here's what makes us, I think, really stand out. As soon as I start typing out a new step, let's say, in my editor here, what do I get? I get these suggestions. Now, these are not merely just suggestions, but rather they are previously defined Gherkin steps in your other scenarios, right? So it's very much like building on a functional library, right? If you write out a bunch of functions in code, you can reuse them by reference, right, by name, and you can edit them from a single point of maintenance. That's the whole point of modular programming. So we're taking that same value here to writing our Gherkin steps. So not only do you want to follow Gaspar's model of saying, okay, how can we talk about the what, how can we write declarative scenarios and work together to simplify what they're talking about, remove superfluous data. We want to take that workflow, then apply it here, where now we can speed up that workflow by easily reusing steps if we need to. Clicking on it. Or even better, if I want to go ahead and bulk update a step here, maybe given I have logged in, I want to say given I'm logged into my home page, right? I can go ahead and make that change one time, and I can rename it everywhere. So the long and the short of it is that each of these steps, these action words, we're only treating them like functions basically, right here in HipTest, right? As some of you know, you might translate these Gherkin steps to functions in code, Java, C#, so on and so forth. But here, right, we're treating them in the same way like functions now, so that not only can I quickly reuse this step over and over again, but I can change it from a single point of maintenance. This will not only speed up my design process quite significantly as I work together to flesh out and example map my scenarios, but when it comes time to refactor and learn from my feedback, right, from my test results, then it's easy to make wholesale changes. Right? You're not bogged down in the manual work it takes to refactor a scenario, which might get you out of this agile process. We want to stay being agile, so our scenario editor is definitely here to support that BDD workflow. So I click rename everywhere, and now my scenario step has changed in all scenarios that are using it. Now the last piece here, in my last couple of minutes of my demo here is, the automation piece, right? And again, BDD is design, test, and learn. We've covered how we can, support the design phase here, and perhaps the learn phase as well by being able to refactor quickly. But the test phase, we can certainly create manual test runs in HipTest, but the real power of BDD says to automate. And not automate for the sake of speed, but really for more feedback, right? The more feedback we get, the more informed decisions we can make against our application development. And unlike other open source tools, we offer you a whole list of frameworks to use. Whether you want to stick within some BDD frameworks like Cucumber or Specflow, or perhaps you want to go maybe take advantage of some unit testing, right? With NUnit or JUnit or TestNG or Protractor, things of that nature. Also coming out some more languages as well. Easy for us to deploy this code by simply clicking on an icon, along with perhaps using command line or using our HipTest publisher as well. And then you can easily feed these test results all the way back to HipTest test run, which again can feed back into a tool like Jira as well. We also recently integrated our HipTest with our automation tool Test Complete. So another way to kind of plug into the BDD process here, right? Where we want to be able to make our automation itself more efficient. If automation is a huge pain, then we're not going to benefit from automating in BDD, right? That's a huge bottleneck. We're going to slow down. So a tool like Test Complete allows teams that maybe do not have full technical skill set or do not have a lot of developers to easily create automated tests without needing to know how to write code. So to kind of summarize my point here, with HipTest, the whole idea is that we're trying to support all the workflows found in BDD more efficiently. Whether you're collaborating together between this tool or other tools, you're writing out scenarios and reusing your steps, right? Your consistent business domain language, and of course, bulk updating those steps as well. And finally, we believe that the automation gives us not only access to a lot of ways to test our application, but gives us things like living documentation as well. So I can go ahead and build out documentation like Gaspar was talking about dynamically through my test runs. But that is my quick demo of HipTest here. If you would like to see more, please don't hesitate to reach out to us via our website. You can also schedule a demo with us as well.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and be launching a poll here in a second. So please click yes or no whether you're interested in learning more. During that poll, we're going to go ahead and get through some of these questions. I've tried to answer as many as I can by typing the answer. Once again, one that's come up a lot, this webinar is being recorded and you will receive a copy of this recording. But to actually dive into some of these questions, here, Gaspar, if you could please maybe, or maybe Gaspar and Param, you can tag team, but we got a question on maintaining scenarios. A year from now, how do you find and edit prior scenarios and any generated test cases?
So, I mean, changing, I guess the question was related to that once you have a scenario which is already automated, if you would like to make a rephrasing it or changing the wording. I mean, on one hand, you have seen in Param's demo, so some tools like HipTest are supporting you with such an easy rename functionality. Of course, it quite much depends on the tool you are using. Yes, some of the tools are already supporting you with an automated approach for that. Otherwise, you need to do it manually just by doing a search and replace maybe, or just finding out all the positions where those steps were used and do the fixes one by one or with some smart search and replace solution. It really depends on the tooling.
Gotcha. We've got a few questions on whether or not HipTest is a free tool. Yes, there is a free download available to you. There's a free version of this tool. If you go to hiptest.com/pricing, you'll be able to find that free version there where you can download it. And if you find that you need to scale up a bit, we do have other plans that can help you in doing so. So there was a question, this was back when you were presenting, Gaspar. You created a step, quote, when I check the home page, but it's calling some specific URL inside. Should this step be parameterized? What if you need to call a different URL?
Yeah, maybe I just share back my my slides and then we can jump there, so it will be easier to talk about that. So let me just scroll back to that one. So yeah, so this was in the beginning where we were just talking about this navigate to some URL, and now I was changing it to something like when I check the home page. I mean, the thing is that typically you will have a couple of scenarios which are talking about the home page, maybe 20, maybe even 50, because depending on how much functionality you have on the home page. And you have two options. One option is to put the URL of your home page into every single scenario, which means that if you change your framework, if you're just changing your URL structure, you need to fix 20, 50 scenarios, or you are just introducing a concept in your, declaring a concept in your application called homepage, and saying that I'm checking the home page, and somewhere in the automation layer, you are maintaining this, this mapping, what is the URL of the home page. And if you change the URL of the home page, then you just need to change it in one place. So, so these are the two options. If you are just putting the URL into the step directly, then obviously then you will need to come back to that scenario and maintain it and keep modifying it. If you are discussing these things in a more business level, homepage is a business level concept, then you can solve this better in the automation layer. Whether the home page is a parameter of this step or not, that's a detailed question. Of course, if you have many pages, like you have a home page, you have a registration page, and you have an about page, then you can make this as a parameter of this step. And then in the automation layer, you just make a switch that, okay, if the home page, then go to this URL. If the registration page, go to that URL. If it's the about page, then go to a third URL. So basically we are making this parameterization down into the automation layer, so that the maintainability of the entire test base should be better.
Great. Question for Param to give you a break. Is there a way to get the tags on examples in HipTest? So if maybe we could walk through the tags a little bit more
Sure.
and how they were shown. I know there are questions also for Gaspar's presentation, so we can highlight that a bit more.
Totally. I think it looks like I'm gonna have to stop sharing a screen.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
It's quite all right. You are the admin here.
Okay.
All right. So with tags specifically, tags are only going to be attached to either an individual scenario, like the one in front of you. So, for example, we could add a tag like, I don't know, like let's do just smoke test. Sure. I could also add tags in a folder of scenarios as well, right? So this could be like, main project, something like that. I'm obviously not adding any proper content here, but the idea is that it's pretty open-ended. I think something to consider is the idea of having a consistent business domain language, not only applied to the steps in your scenarios, right, for refactorability, maintainability's sake, but also how you organize your data as well, right? So that, whether the folders probably should be, about functional error, maybe the tags are a little more low level, right? They can allow developers and testers and BAs to come in here and kind of quickly refer to that information and find it. And ultimately, tags and folders, they play their main piece in two places. The metrics section, where you can compare items by certain tags or based on tag key. This is generally based on just coverage, I'd say. It's kind of like seeing how much of my behavior is being covered, et cetera, et cetera. Test, the only other place that tags and folders come into play is test runs. When I create a new test run, right, I can do so by selecting from a folder or specific tag, or a combination of the two. Ultimately, that's where folders and tags kind of play around in HipTest. They allow us to organize in a way that best suits us from a readability standpoint, and it can really inform how you test as well, right? Because if you're organizing by functional area, then it's easy to test by functional area. I hope that answered the question.
And then another question for you, Gaspar. I do really like this brief approach, but sometimes it is hard to use an end-to-end test for both manual and automated tests. How do you deal with that? For example, if we need to follow certain actions to reach a certain state, we may not be able to extract them in different scenarios. Do you have any ideas?
So, I mean, it's unfortunately, manual testing and automated testing is behaving differently. It's something that we cannot fully unify. This is what I mentioned. For manual testing, the thing is optimized for the person, so you don't want to set up the preconditions so many times. In automated testing, the independence and reliability is more important asset. So there is a conflict between that. What I like to do in this case that these scenarios are put into some sort of container, either in a folder structure like in HipTest or in a feature file in many Gherkin tools. What you can do, you can put these focused scenarios into a file into some logical order, so that first about asking a question, then about a scenario which is displaying a question, and then this will be fine for automation. However, if someone as a manual tester would like to go through that and do that manually, they will be able to smartly fix that. So they will probably go through the first scenario manually asking a question, and the next one is anyway starting that given I have a question, they will just pick a question from the existing question list and then just move on from that. So basically a little bit smarter arrangement of the scenarios is helping you to be able to run it as a manual test as well. Or if that's totally not working, then you have to make a separate set of scenarios, which are the one which is used for automated test. And maybe you can have much smaller number, a few scenarios which you do for manual regression testing, where of course these brief principles doesn't necessarily apply.
Wonderful. Final question. Are there any BDD principles for running tests in parallel? Param, I'll let you take this one.
I'm not so sure there's any BDD specific principles. I think that automation in general, you definitely want to try and get as many parallel tests as you can, right? You can kind of run way more tests in a much shorter amount of time that way. The key is what tools you use to do that, right? If you're using traditional automation tools, you'll need a list of slave nodes or machines that can run these test cases in parallel, right? Especially for front-end tests, because there's only one mouse and keyboard to go around. I think for API testing, it'll be a little bit different. But then we have, SmartBear has some tools that can fit that space as well. For example, I said earlier, we integrate with our own test complete cross-browser testing. Test complete can be run in parallel with our tool test execute for a cheap way to get parallel test runs on machines that are written with test written or test complete. Then cross-browser testing is a tool where we can run web tests in parallel on the cloud. So for any of you who are feeling the pain of either maintaining a device lab or not wanting to pay for one, we'll give you one through cross-browser testing, so you can test your web applications on a number of different mobile and desktop devices configurations and OSs. So again, maybe Gaspar, if you want to chime in, I don't know if there's a BDD specific component.
I don't think it's too much BDD specific, but what I want to add to this is that obviously if you run parallel, you have to watch for shared resources. The more shared resources, especially for writing, you are using like a shared database, the harder it will be to get the parallel execution. So all the industry is trying to go, for example, into this containerization kind of route that's putting the things into self-contained containers that you can create as many instances as you want from them. That's generally a very good starting point for doing massive parallelization.
Wonderful. Well, we are at well over the hour. I'm so sorry to keep everyone late. There are still a few questions we didn't get to, running things with CI, some references, a lot of different things, and we will be sure to send you some links or follow-ups that answer these questions. We really want to say a quick thank you, Gaspar, so much for joining us. It was really wonderful to have you on this. I know I learned a lot, Param also learned a lot, we've all learned a lot. Seems like a great webinar overall. And thank you everyone so much for the attendees as well for taking some time out of your day to share it with us. It was really wonderful to get to talk with you all, and we appreciate the wonderful questions as well. So with that, thank you so much, and hope to see you soon on a future webinar. I did send a I did send a link in the chat box if you would like to join us for our next webinar, which will have a little bit more details for writing examples for HipTest specifically. Until then, thank you so much, and hope to talk to you all soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.